Usually I don't like using slang like Sony pony to describe the uncritical and rabid subset of PlayStation's fan base. I usually find the phrase off-putting and overly belittling. That said, it's hard to find a better term to describe a group of people who are so willing to just prance around and trot along the company line, so happy to parrot Sony's corporate propaganda. So for anyone who isn't aware, Sony begrudgingly disclosed that Gran Turismo 7, the first mainline Gran Turismo game in almost a decade, is going to require the player to maintain a constant internet connection for pretty much everything in the game. As could be expected of such a frankly anti-consumer decision and the slimy way Sony tried to hide the news from their customers, people weren't so happy about it and have taken to various articles and videos discussing the news, including my prior video on Gran Turismo 7's DRM, to voice their disdain for the game's artificially imposed online restrictions. However, while a lot of people were upset, many others made the bewildering decision to defend Sony. Yeah, you heard that right. People are actually saying that it's a good thing that Gran Turismo 7, a game that should never need to connect to the internet, forces everyone who plays it to connect to the internet. To clarify, this isn't just people doing devil's advocate speculation as to Sony's intent behind the DRM decision. This is people who are straight up saying that there is nothing wrong with a game forcing players to be online just to play sections of the game that never should have to be online. Anyone who has heard the company's defense of these online requirements or has skimmed through the comments of any of these articles on Gran Turismo 7, you've seen these quote-unquote arguments that people keep regurgitating over and over again. Oh, it's meant to stop cheaters. Gran Turismo Sport required an always online connection too. Oh, who doesn't have internet these days, etc, etc, etc. You get the point. It's sad, really. People are more than happy to act as Sony's unpaid PR team because they see PlayStation as their little friend, despite the fact that Sony sees them as little more than piggy banks with legs. And in Sony's defense, considering how mindlessly these supposed fans keep echoing the same couple of arguments over and over and over again for the benefit of nobody except Sony, it's hard to see them as anything other than talking ATMs in service of PlayStation, Sony, and Jim Ryan. Right, with that in mind, none of these arguments ultimately hold water as valid reasons to hold the game hostage behind a server connection. Number one, oh, it's to stop cheaters. Yeah? Well, if that's the case, why do the photo mode and livery editor require the internet, huh? Why is that the case if it's to prevent cheating, if it's to prevent undue progress in the game? Why are the single-player campaign mode and the player's personal car collection held hostage by Sony's servers? They easily could have made these available offline and could have made separate save files for the offline career mode and the online multiplayer mode so that modders couldn't affect the leaderboards. They could have both stopped cheaters and made this gameplay exactly the same as older Gran Turismo games, but they instead chose to force everyone online, whether they want to be or not. Gran Turismo Sport required the internet too. Why don't you have a problem with that? A lot of people do. A lot of longtime Gran Turismo fans did have a problem with that and continue to have a problem with that. GT Sport sold well below expectations and remains one of the worst-selling Gran Turismo games ever, in large part because players didn't like the fact that it required them to be online to play and chose not to buy it. The fact that you could get booted back to the start screen in the middle of a single-player race just because your Wi-Fi dropped is infuriating. It's a manufactured problem that should have never existed, and just because the last game was hamstrung by these types of stupid decisions doesn't mean that we want the new one to have it. If anything, Gran Turismo Sport has cemented in many people's minds their disdain for unnecessary always-online requirements. Oh, who doesn't have internet these days? This is by far the most present argument, the one I've seen the most ubiquitous one, is people saying, oh, who doesn't have internet these days? And for those people, listen up. You may be lucky enough to have an unflinching internet connection, but for those of us who are living in rural areas, for those of us who are poor, for those of us who are living in third world countries like the United States of America, we don't really have that option. Who doesn't have internet access these days? To people like you, it may be a surprise to hear this, but people who pay for the internet are people who don't have internet access these days. Signals fluctuate, internet service providers throttle connections, outages happen, and so on and so forth. An inability to connect to the game's server may only be an occasional annoyance for some, but for others, it means going through a constant struggle with your Wi-Fi just to play a video game. And it's not even necessary, it's artificially there, and you have to struggle with it despite the fact that it doesn't need to be there in the first place. And even if a lost connection interrupts someone's career playthrough of Gran Turismo 7 only once, that's still one more time than should ever be considered acceptable by anyone. All of this is just focusing on the infuriating issues that can occur when Gran Turismo 7 is going through its life cycle. This is before we even begin to discuss the eventual and inevitable day Sony shuts down the servers and makes the game unplayable for everyone, including the people defending always online DRM. That's right, corporate cheerleaders, you're defending not only Sony dictating when and how you can play the video game you bought for a minimum of $70, you're also defending the fact that one day Sony will yank the game out of your hands forever. And for those of you who think I'm being hyperbolic, that Sony won't pull the plug on Gran Turismo 7 the second it stops being profitable for them, need I remind you that Sony attempted to shut down the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita stores earlier this year, which would have effectively wiped over 100 games from existence. Customer outrage is the only reason that did not happen. Need I remind you that Gran Turismo's online servers have never persisted beyond a few years for their mainline entries, that the second a new game comes out in the Gran Turismo series, within a few months of that happening, they'll yank the servers away from their prior game in order to effectively force people on the new game. It's pretty clear that this game is designed from the start to just die so Sony can manufacture demand for the sequel. Hell, PlayStation executive Jim Ryan has more or less admitted that he sees no value in old games, a belief that serves his greed-fueled personal interests very well. For those of you who don't believe me, here's a direct quote from the man himself. When we've dabbled with backwards compatibility, I can say it is one of those features that is much requested, but not actually used much. That, and I was at a Gran Turismo event recently where they had PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4 games, and the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games, they looked ancient. Like, why would anybody play this? Considering both his financial motivations and the fact that he said this at an event where there were likely thousands of people playing these so-called ancient games, it becomes clear that this is nothing more than Jim Ryan's dog-whistly way of saying, I don't value games that Sony can't profit from anymore, and neither should you. At the end of the day, it's not about fighting cheaters or any of the other reasons that Sony's saying. Not really. It's about robbing you of the racing game you bought so that you have to buy the next one. And the sooner you stop defending the game's always online DRM and start calling Sony out, the better it's going to be for Gran Turismo 7. Stop defending the anti-customer business practices of a soulless corporation that will never love you back.